this topic since the esoteric, and it's going to be the final series. And yes, it's named after Epicurus. It's a system of philosophy founded at around 307 BCE, based upon the teachings of the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus. Epicureanism was originally a challenge to uh, Platoism, and later its main opponent became Stoicism. Few writings by Epicurus have survived. Yes, I'm Wikipedia. And it says, in the ancient philosopher founded in the Athens by Epicurus, the school reject determinism and advocate the hedonism. Yeah, you also see this in the utilitarian video I mentioned, and pleasure as the highest good, but in a restrained kind of mental pleasure was regarded for more highly than physical, and ultimate pleasure was held by the freedom from anxiety and mental pain, especially that arising amongst from needless fear and of the gods. Yep, Epicureanism. Yeah, we want to make this, and I got one with the Stoic versus Epicureanism. We'll get that in a minute. Uh, yeah, why and not Stoicism. Okay, we're gonna read this. This is the information I found recent. I think this was in January. Why Epicureanism, not Stoicism, is the philosophy we need now. Philosophers have warned against pleasure since Plato, but Epicurean principles can be base of humane politics aimed at security for all. Okay, and we have what ideas to come to mind when you hear the word Epicurean? Probably which snob, gourmet cooking, foppish, foppish, superficial, idle, frivolous, decadent, selfish, of course, pleasure seeking, pleasure, and the Epicurean philosophy, which it plays a central role, and it's a fixed star. Oh, is the word, like a zodiac word, is a fixed star of philosophical disapproval. All the race from Plato to our modern theorists of well being. Not to mention that the father of the early church still warned against it. Back then, the attacks on the pleasure focused on the superiority of humans into other animals and our special, uh, the codependencies, obligations, and responsibilities, and pleasure is what the dumb, irrational animals pursue: eating, mating, loafing. We humans are made for higher and more difficult and sometimes more painful things. As the Stoics and the ancient opponents of the Epicureans insist of fortified in adversity, self-control, intellectual labor, local inferences, and the contemplation, yeah, contemplation of the spiritual and immaterial entities. Today, the uneasiness about pleasure also reflects an aversion to consumerism and to the emptiness of promise of the advertisers of who introduced to us believe that this is that product or activity is the key to fun-filled days, restful sleep. But the use of reason, self-control, of frugality are worthwhile. Aims and worth philosophizing over. But aside with the Epicurus, the third century BCE, founder of the ancient Greek sect, who stated, "Do not even know what I should conceive to be good. If I eliminate pleasure of taste and eliminate the pleasure of sex, eliminate the pleasures of listening, eliminate the pleasant motions caused in our vision by sensible forms. If the exercise of our rationality in learning, thinking, communicating were not pleasurable, there will be no point in trying to master any subject or practice. If self control did not reduce the pain caused to others, otherwise, there would be no purpose to it. If consumerism were not accompanied by environmental destruction, global inequality, unjust labor practices, it would be hard to find much wrong with it. Rightly understood, philosophical Epicureanism is political and personal powerful worldview. The bellies and its caricatures and its key elements are unflinching. I mean, uh, unflinching refusal to believe that the spiritual entities designed, created, or control the world, combined with the convincement that the death, irreversible decomposition into the materials atoms at the end for each living being. Okay, Epicureans contend that the morality has to be faced without futile struggles, protests, or walls, or of a tragedy, meaning the joy not the only philosopher, the only of the philosopher, but all of us is to be found in an experience, including the experience of coming into understanding. Okay, they understand how nature and society actually work. Death puts at the end of these pleasures. But as the Epicureans were fond of pointing it out, we will not be abound the experience depri- uh, deprivation. Yeah, deprivation. Okay. Epicurus made it clear from the start that he did not advocate to direct pursuit of personal pleasure in the forms of gluttony, indiscriminate sex, or overcomposition of intoxicating substance. This was foolish, as is ultimately produced pain. Real pleasure arises from judicious, though not overly fussy, choice and avoidance. And avoidance is as important as a choice. Epicurean ethics reduce it to a few simple principles: avoid harming others, live so that others have no motive to harm you. Four agreements within for the mutual aids and protection of the greatest good for a human being. Epicurus thought it is friendship, pleasure in the presence of another individual, and the security of knowing that the help will be given if it was ever needed. According to the Epicurus, cold, hunger, and illness are the main causes of the human misery, but we are liable to other forms of suffering and deprivation. The management of wealth, he would observe, is attended with the anxiety and the ambitions in an arena will reveal themselves surrounded by the dangerous enemies. Keep your worldly ambitions the modest, and he advised. Unrequired love, and he recognized is terrible to endure, as it is the torments of the jealousy. So keep away from anyone threatening to make you miserable before you are in over your head. Why would anyone resist such as an appalling philosophy? For one thing, we are taught to strive for money, esteem, and power over others. Even when the pursuit breakdown of our health created enemies and leave a little time for enjoyment. And keeping our eyes fixed and ambitious goals, we averted them from the deprivations of other people suffer through no fault for other their own. A political message of much philosophy through the ages, and the argument of one encounters in Aristotle's Politics as well as in Immanuel Kant's critique of judgment. Okay, is that deprivation is suffering of the majority of human beings is an arrangement favored by nature and the cosmos, so the superior few can thrive. Many religions teach that suffering today does not matter because it will be compensated for in another life. Yeah, like the afterlife. Okay. Epicureans thought this was a wicked nonsense, and their later followers, especially Thomas Hobbes, Jeremy Bentham, and John Stuart Mill and Karl Marx, agree. Okay, if you look at these guys, Tom Hobbes, these guys were um, one of them one of them is what you call the consequentialist. That's Thomas Hobbes, and Jeremy Bentham is a quantitative. I made a video called Quantitative Utilitarianism. In one of those videos, the difference between quantitative and the utilitarian video series you can watch. I think it's part 2 or 3 or something like that. And then I mentioned John Stuart Mill, his father James Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill is a qualitative utilitarian, and Karl Marx, of course, he's a communist, but he did use forms of utilitarianism in his communist doctrine. I mentioned that in the utilitarian videos. I think the latest one. Okay, back to this. These thinkers insist is in their different ways that this life is all we have, that human politics ought to aim security for all the enjoyment in the present. Okay, an important objection to regarding pleasure as the sole human good and pain as the only true evil is that the few of us would choose to take a bliss drug and kept us in a permanent and passive state of delight, unaware of our hurts. Most would rather experience hardships, ups and downs, the pains of off and on deprivation that keep our appetite sharp. The Epicurean can agree entirely. A blessed drug would not be a source of real pleasure. It would wipe our experience. Blissed out, we would not be encountering the world as it is, but as a distorted world, which the cause, the physical, philosophical, psychological, okay, the physical and psychological pleasure as well as pain were obscured. What would be epic? What would an Epicurean world look like? Okay, they said what it would look like, right? It would be a base as our world is on the value of the speed, efficiency of output, transformation of raw materials into consumer products, and consumer products and rubbish at whatever human cost. It will be the focus in enhancing another form of utility. You hear it again. That is a form of utilitarianism they mentioned, Epicureanism, right? The creation of good experience and the minimal minimization of pain. Yep, utilitarianism. This is not nihilistic, so BGS is incorrect about that. No, this is a utilitarian doctrine. It has a nihilistic points of views, but it's actually utilitarian if you want to go further back. So he's incorrect. He tries to say you got them mixed up. No, not according to my research. I found this on newsstatesman.com. It is a recent. Okay. So are we? Adam Smith hoped and believed that the deregulation capitalism would accomplish the goal, which he called universal opulence, for the reasons well understood by the economists and sociologists and philosophers too, that has not happened. Given the political, economic, environmental, and health crises that have defined 2020, Epicureanism provides um, unique and timely philosophical framework for reform our institutions, our interactions with the natural world, and our relationships with each other. Catherine Wilson is a visiting president professor in the philosophy at the City of University of New York Graduate School. She's an author, How to Be an Epicurean, Ancient Art of Living Well. Yep. And this article is port. Yep. That is why you don't want to be a stoic. And this is what we're going to call it. Yeah. It's a good article on the bottom. They say you can go article series, collaboration between the New Statesman. Yeah. You can find it up here. And I'm going to say, yeah, New Statesman. Right. So, like it says, the article says, New Statesman, they said, why Epicureanism? I just read, and not Stoicism is the philosophy we need to grow. We need now. That's what it says. Okay. I'm going to probably leave that off. And now we're getting to the series of Stoicism versus Epicureanism. Wisdom, the difference between the two. I'm going to put this in the bed. Let's see what I can do here. I'll leave that alone. Okay. Yeah. I'll make another video by Epicureanism, part 2 to this. Okay, Epicureanism versus Stoicism. Okay. Let's see what we got here. A minute. Sorry for the noise, guys. Okay. All right. Let's get back to business. Okay. Okay. The English language has drawn a great observation of the two ancient philosophies and greatest schools, Stoicism and Epicureanism. In the case of Stoicism in the popular meaning today suggests a little bit more than stiff upper lip and hyper rational, emotionalist. Emotionalist. Automation, not unlike the Star Trek character Spock. Similar to Epicureanism's popular meaning evokes a kind of sorority, indulge in food and drink, bodily pleasures, not unlikely Blodo Voltarovsky, okay, in Animal House. Both images are exactly the opposite of the founders of the schools that live and what they taught. Just as Stoicism would never be a philosophy of the emotionless calculation, so Epicureanism was never about okay, the hedonistic excesses. In both cases, popular misunderstanding, okay, like this, in in both misunderstandings would arise from the caricatures peddled by much later members of the schools against each other, while differing substantially despite of how much do schools eventually caricature each other. There were at the outset and more like the sibling rivals fighting for attention in the cradle of Athenian philosophy. Both were philosophies of life, focusing on the care of the soul and the practical wisdom. Yeah. Let nobody put off doing the philosophy when young, nor did get tired of doing it when old. For no one is too young or too old to secure the health of one's soul. Epicurus. Okay. Epicurus is founded his school in 306 BCE in Athens, just 5 years before Zeno would branch out from his studies with the Cynics and the Megarians. He established the Stoic school in 301 BCE. Both men were launching new schools against two, the longest establishment schools of Plato. Let's see. You couldn't hear me. Okay. So Plato. And as Stoics return also. Okay, I'm going to leave this slide.